Operation Barbarossa began on June 22, 1941, when Nazi Germany launched a massive surprise attack on the Soviet Union. Hitler had already conquered much of Europe, and he believed the Soviet Union would be an easy target. The plan was ambitious: capture key cities like Moscow, Leningrad, and the resource-rich Ukraine. Nearly 3 million German soldiers, tanks, and aircraft were mobilized in a coordinated blitzkrieg. Initially, the plan seemed perfect, as German forces advanced rapidly and captured vast territories. Yet, beneath this early success were dangerous miscalculations, overconfidence, and stretched supply lines. The Soviet Union, despite initial losses, slowly began to mobilize reserves and relocate industries, preparing to resist the invaders. This first phase set the stage for a war far longer and more brutal than Hitler had imagined. The attack stretched over 1,800 miles, making it the largest invasion in history at that time. Blitzkrieg tactics combined fast tanks, coordinated infantry, and air support to overwhelm Soviet defenses. In the opening weeks, Germany captured Belarus, western Ukraine, and the Baltic states. Millions of Soviet soldiers were taken prisoner, and entire cities fell quickly. Despite these setbacks, the Soviet Union was not defeated. Stalin, initially shocked, began moving factories east and mobilizing fresh troops. These actions allowed the Soviets to rebuild defenses, creating unexpected resistance. The rapid advance also exposed German logistical weaknesses, as supply lines became dangerously long. Winter was approaching, and the conditions would soon challenge even the most disciplined troops. What seemed like a lightning victory was turning into a grueling campaign of attrition. Hitler's diversion of forces from Moscow was a crucial mistake. He sent troops toward Ukraine and Leningrad, believing these regions were economically and politically vital. This weakened the German push toward Moscow and allowed Soviet forces to regroup. The Red Army, though initially unprepared, used reserves effectively, slowing German progress. Soldiers faced exhaustion and extended supply lines, and harsh weather conditions began to take their toll. German equipment struggled in the cold, and frostbite became a serious problem. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, accustomed to these conditions, prepared counterattacks. Overconfidence, ideological focus, and misjudged priorities turned an initially unstoppable force into a vulnerable army. Germany's early victories were becoming tactical gains overshadowed by strategic problems. The Battle of Kiev highlighted Germany's tactical skill but strategic limits. German forces encircled hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers, one of the largest single defeats in military history. However, this victory delayed the march toward Moscow and consumed critical resources. Supply lines stretched hundreds of miles, leaving troops hungry and fatigued. Soviet forces replaced losses quickly, preparing defenses for future battles. Hitler's obsession with symbolic victories over strategic objectives contributed to slowing the campaign. As winter approached, the harsh climate favored Soviet defenders. The initial brilliance of blitzkrieg started to face serious logistical and environmental obstacles. Tactical victories were now turning into long-term challenges, signaling that the Eastern Front would be a prolonged struggle. As German forces approached Moscow, winter arrived early and severely hampered their advance. Soldiers lacked proper winter clothing, tanks froze in mud, and frostbite became common. Exhausted troops faced fierce Soviet resistance in the Battle of Moscow. In December 1941, the Red Army launched a powerful counteroffensive, pushing German forces back and marking the first major German strategic defeat. This battle shattered the myth of Nazi invincibility. Blitzkrieg tactics proved limited against a determined enemy over vast territories. Hitler's focus on ideology rather than pure military logic worsened the situation. What had been planned as a swift conquest evolved into a long, costly struggle, depleting German resources and morale. Barbarossa was also an ideological war. The Nazis aimed to destroy communism, eliminate Jews, and enslave or remove anyone considered a threat to the Reich. Special units called Einsatzgruppen followed the army, conducting atrocities against civilians. These policies created resentment and resistance among the occupied populations. Partisans and local fighters sabotaged German operations behind the lines. Instead of quick victory, Germany faced growing opposition, both military and civilian. The invasion became a war of both ideology and survival, with civilians suffering greatly while the Red Army reorganized. This mixture of genocide and military operations complicated Germany's plans and drained their manpower. Despite massive initial gains, Germany began to face serious logistical challenges. Troops advanced faster than supply lines could manage. Fuel, food, and ammunition shortages became common. Snow and freezing temperatures slowed movement, and equipment failures increased. The Soviet Union, by contrast, used the harsh winter to its advantage, preparing counterattacks. German generals struggled to maintain momentum while Hitler's decisions often overruled strategic advice. Overextension of forces meant that German units were isolated and vulnerable. The initial speed of the invasion could no longer compensate for the growing challenges. The first signs of a turning point were emerging, foreshadowing the long struggle that lay ahead on the Eastern Front. The human cost of the invasion was staggering. Millions of soldiers and civilians suffered. Cities were destroyed, villages burned, and countless lives lost. The Eastern Front became one of the deadliest theaters of World War II. German soldiers faced starvation, frostbite, and exhaustion. Soviet troops fought under extreme conditions to defend their homeland. Civilians endured forced labor, deportations, and atrocities committed by invading forces. The social and humanitarian impact of Barbarossa was immense, leaving scars that lasted for decades. The war was no longer just military, it became a struggle for survival for both nations. Partisan resistance played a key role in complicating German operations. Local fighters sabotaged railways, attacked supply convoys, and gathered intelligence for the Red Army. These guerrilla actions slowed German advances and stretched resources even further. The harsh terrain of forests and swamps provided natural advantages to the partisans. Their efforts boosted Soviet morale and created constant pressure behind German lines. Even experienced German soldiers found it difficult to suppress these irregular forces. Partisan warfare, combined with winter and extended supply lines, made Barbarossa a campaign far more complex than initially planned. The approach to Leningrad and Ukraine diverted critical resources from Moscow. Hitler's focus on symbolic cities and economic regions spread German forces thin. While the army captured cities and inflicted losses, the delay allowed Soviet forces to fortify Moscow. The diversion reflected ideological priorities overriding military logic. German success was visible on maps, but the strategic objective, capturing Moscow swiftly, remained unfulfilled. These decisions demonstrated how leadership choices at the top affected battlefield outcomes. The Eastern Front was proving to be a war of attrition, where every tactical victory could be offset by strategic miscalculations. The Battle of Moscow demonstrated the resilience of the Soviet army. Counterattacks in December 1941 surprised German forces, pushing them back and preventing the capture of the capital. Troops suffered from extreme cold and exhausted supply lines, further weakening their position. The Red Army's ability to replace lost soldiers and equipment showcased the industrial and human capacity of the Soviet Union. For Germany, the failure to seize Moscow marked a turning point, showing that early victories could not guarantee ultimate success. The tide of war was shifting slowly but steadily toward the Soviets. Strategic lessons from Barbarossa are still studied today. Logistics, timing, weather, and morale proved as important as tactical brilliance. Hitler's ideological focus compromised operational effectiveness. The campaign highlighted the dangers of overextension and underestimating an enemy. Despite initial dominance, German forces could not adapt quickly to environmental and logistical challenges. The Soviet ability to endure losses and mount counteroffensives revealed the importance of preparation, organization, and resilience in war. Operation Barbarossa became a defining example of how even the most powerful military force can be slowed and ultimately defeated by a combination of factors beyond raw battlefield strength. The war on the Eastern Front reshaped global World War II strategy. Germany was forced into a prolonged two-front war, fighting the Allies in the West and the Soviet Union in the East. Massive losses drained manpower and resources, weakening the Third Reich. The resilience of the Soviets, combined with winter and partisan actions, meant that Germany could not achieve its intended quick victory. Barbarossa's failure set the stage for the eventual collapse of Nazi Germany, as prolonged warfare stretched its capabilities to the breaking point. Strategic overreach, environmental challenges, and determined resistance turned early hope into long-term struggle. The human consequences were immense. Civilians suffered starvation, displacement, and death. Entire towns and villages were destroyed. Soldiers on both sides faced unimaginable hardships in extreme weather. The Eastern Front became a theater of total war, with no distinction between military and civilian hardship. This human toll contributed to long-lasting social, political, and emotional consequences. Families were torn apart, populations displaced, and communities destroyed. The legacy of Barbarossa endured long after the guns fell silent, shaping post-war Europe and the memory of World War II. In conclusion, Operation Barbarossa stands as one of the largest and most ambitious military campaigns in history. Initial German victories were impressive, but strategic errors, harsh winter conditions, logistical challenges, and resilient Soviet resistance doomed the plan. The campaign reshaped the course of World War II, drained German resources, and left a lasting human and political legacy. Studying Barbarossa teaches the importance of logistics, preparation, and the limits of overconfidence. Despite technological and tactical superiority, even the mightiest armies can falter when strategy, environment, and determined opposition collide. The failure of Barbarossa marked the beginning of the end for the Third Reich and changed the Eastern